With that being said, let's begin. I'm going to start by giving like a short introduction and background on the topic, and then I'll go on to introduce the amazing expert panel that we have for you today. So the webinar is called Violence Against Women, Challenges Reform and the Pandemic. Now, violence against women and protections against domestic abuse, unfortunately, is a topic that Pakistan was all too familiar with even before the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the pandemic has amplified existing barriers to access help in abusive relationships, while the UN Secretary General has urged governments to place women's safety at the top of their priority list when making policy decisions. Therefore, the integration of a gendered perspective is imperative for a holistic, inclusive, and non-discriminatory effective policy response, not only to COVID-19, but also beyond. Apart from the stigma and patriarchal notions attached to violence within the home, a lack of sensitization of frontline officials and police on proper referral system in this regard also discourages women from reporting cases of domestic violence, resulting in non-reporting, inhibiting women to seek help. In a lockdown situation, the increased exposure to these perpetrators makes women and children even more vulnerable, with even less means of reporting due to curbs on mobility. With Pakistan heading towards what health experts are calling the fourth wave, with lockdown restrictions threatening to be tightened and the recently rejected domestic violence bill in Islamabad, it's an imperative time to be considering the country's violence against women preventive policies during the pandemic and beyond. In today's session, we are joined by an expert panel that I'll be introducing shortly. Firstly, we're joined by Ms. Nighat Dad, who is Executive Director of Digital Rights Foundation, a research-based advocacy NGO focusing on ICTs to support human rights, democratic processes, and digital governance. We're also joined by Romina Khurshid MNA since 2013, and known for her work in human rights. She is currently serving as Treasury Women Parliamentarians Caucus. Furthermore, we are joined by Ms. Havar Mumtaz, a Pakistani women rights activist, author, and university lecturer. She is the former chairperson of the National Commission on the Status of Women, who has served for 2 consecutive terms from 2013 to 2019. The seat has since been vacant. Finally, we are going to be joined by Ms. Marvi Awan, a social political female activist and executive director at Women Police Protection Center, WPC Sindh, who works very closely with women protection cells with the Sindh Police. Dr. Shireen Mazari unfortunately had to send her regrets as an urgent matter arose. With that, I'd like to begin our panel discussion by directing my first question towards Ms. Nighat Dad. With your professional experience, especially within the digital awareness and media sector, what would you consider to be the greatest challenge in protecting women under lockdown conditions and beyond? And if you have any recommendations for how you think such issues should be tackled. Over to you.
Thank you, Maruf. So we are working on generally on digital rights, but one of our primary focuses is addressing online violence against young girls and women, but also marginalized communities. There is a cyber harassment helpline that the Digital Rights Foundation has been running since 2016. So what a drastic change that we witnessed during lockdown back in 2020 was the drastic increase in the number of cases that we received on the helpline. And those were like 80% as compared to. So what I feel is that, so our challenge was first as a first responder, as a helpline, to, like not having an enough infrastructure in place, like technically, even to run the helpline during lockdowns. I think that was something that we dealt as like first responder and reached out to Pakistan Telecommunication Authority. And I think while we are talking about reporting challenges by victims and survivors, I think it's very important to talk about how first responders face challenges, not just helplines and shelters and other services, but also at the end of the law enforcement. So we face this challenge of how to continue with our helpline while giving these services. At the same time, our next challenge was responsible authority when it comes to cybercrime is Federal Investigation Agency Cybercrime Wing. And that was not really active because offices were closed, and we had no idea where to send these survivors who want to lodge their complaint with the cybercrime wings. So of course, everyone took their time to figure out, like how to continue their work during lockdown and stuff. But I feel that when it comes to online violence against women, it's especially in Pakistan, it's not a subject that has been given proper, attention, or there is a proper political will that we have seen is involved in later, conversation. But just one thing that I wanted to say, that there is a law. There is a law that was enacted in 2016, which is called Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, that deals with almost all forms of cyber harassment and violence against women in the online spaces. I think the problem with the law is not basically enforcing the law in its full spirit. No proper training of cybercrime wings, not enough resources of cybercrime wing, how to deal with, increased number of complaints that are, actually increasing day by day because of the accessibility towards technology and, more internet penetration in Pakistan. We'll talk about those challenges when it comes to online violence against women, but that's what we faced as first responders, and we were also helpless how to support victims and survivors who were reaching out to us at the helpline.
Thank you so much for those comments. That was very helpful. It's very helpful to also see kind of the cybercrime sector, which I do think you're right, is often ignored when it comes to talking about these discussions. And of course, it's important to bring that field in so we can have more comprehensive coverage. I am, however, interested in what you said about lack of proper attention for this. Do you think this is an issue that is more directly affected when we talk about the subsection of cybercrime, or do you think there's more we could do as society to encourage societal watchdogs and have more interest in issues? Because this is, as we talked about in the background, something that we consider a private matter. And so socially, in that aspect, do you think more needs to be done?
Yeah, of course, Maruf. I mean, yeah, I mean, sorry, is this a question to me or to someone else? All right, it's to me.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
So I feel that definitely, we need more people, we need more organizations, we need more watchdogs, we need, more trainings for the cybercrime wing officials, right? Because they are now inducted more and more investigation officers and prosecutors and people who are at the front desk who deal with the victims and survivors. I mean, gender sensitive training is one thing, but then there is no a proper step by step sort of guide for people. Not even we are working on this issue for so many years, we don't even know what to tell the victim and survivor when it comes to filing a complaint to Federal Investigation Agency, right? So there is a law, there are rules, but then how the law enforcement basically functions and operates is another question. I think that's where we really need to focus how we can also build our own learning and knowledge and capacity to understand the nature of cyber crimes, and especially the ones against women, children, and young girls. But at the same time, I think it's also enforcement, but also for the organizations who are working on this and the political will. It's very important for our parliamentarians to understand how internet works, really the basic thing, how internet works, how crimes happen on internet, what can be done around this, what are the best practices beyond Pakistani borders in other jurisdictions, and do not copy paste whatever is happening in the Western world, but contextualize when we are bringing in new laws, or it's just not the one law that I'm talking about. There are other several regulations and rules and policies that are coming in to regulate internet, but not all laws are good laws, right? So I think it's very important for our parliament and legislature to build their understanding around digital spaces, digital rights. At the same time, judiciary to understand more, because they are the ones who are supposed to and responsible to, define a good jurisprudence around the laws while, deciding cases on cybercrimes. So I think these are a couple of things that I want, like all stakeholders to understand when it comes to online violence against women or marginalized communities, or when we say cybercrime in general.
Thank you so much for that very comprehensive overview once more about the importance of incorporating modern day technology and looking beyond our own scope and contextualizing that. And I think it's also very important, as you pointed out, to have a policy response framework that organizations know and first responders know, and a strategy, like a concrete strategy for them to follow out when they are approached to do the job that they have been selected to do. So thank you so much for that. I'd like to pose my next question to Ms. Marvi Avan, who is a social and political female activist and executive director of the Women Protection Center, WPC Sindh. Particularly, not only would I like to ask her the more general question of, within your professional experience, what do you consider to be the greatest challenge under lockdown conditions and beyond? And how would you recommend tackling such issues? But also, in particularly with your work in collaboration with the Sindh Police and within Women Protection Cells, how those matters have come about. Marvi, are you here with us? I believe you're muted.
Hi. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm but I think due to network issue, I couldn't listen your voice. Something a question that I'm trying to address. You are asking about the work we are doing with Sindh Police in collaboration. Can you please repeat your question?
Yeah, of course. So I was asking, within your professional experience, what do you think has been the greatest challenge in protecting women and having preventative policies for violence against women? And particularly as Ms. Nigadad was just talking about how incorporating police trainings is very important as a step. I was wondering with you and your work with the Sindh Police, what your thoughts are on that and what your experience has been.
Okay, that is why, Maru, we are working with Sindh Police since 2016. We have introduced a complaint mechanism within the department. So we are dealing domestic violence, all forms of violence and harassment against women. And now we are working on children's rights as well. The situations are happening with the child, or the psychological impacts are happening whenever violence is happening with them or with to their parents if they are subjected to violence. So what kind of trauma they are going through. So we are working now. The work is the list of the violence is increasing day by day, because when we started working with Sindh Police, we just announced this thing that we will not reveal women identity, because we feel that whenever is woman coming to any department, any institution, so she's having some fear. She's having some fear of losing her identity, or if people get to know about. So we will not compromise, or we will not reveal her identity till the matter is not converting into a FIR, or if the matter is not of high level of killing of women or any way. If any domestic violence conflicts or these kind of things are coming to us, or a woman is coming to report us, so we will not reveal their identity. Later on, we have found that people are coming with so many different issues which are still unknown to media or the people working on this subject, like the blackmailing issue or the marital rape, or so many other things which are still are kind of unknown to media or the policymakers or the people who are working to prevent violence against women. So here I would like to share with you that what was the situation when pandemic happened. Since the pandemic, we have observed that the woman is getting difficulty to come into the institution or calling them directly to help, because when we see the rural areas where women have not access to cell phones, or she is not allowed to go out of the home, but community members or community leaders try to uh, try to complain on their behalf. So we are we try our best to address these kind of complaints as well. But specifically in pandemic time, when we see that government implements lockdown, people were not allowed to come out of their houses, and the transport was suspended as well, and so many other things were imposed by the government. So we feel that women become more vulnerable. She was not able to come out of her house or coming to us or calling to us. And another reason was that the abuser used to present at home all the time. He was not doing for his work. So lockdown situation and pandemic situation first increased violence ratio, and second made women vulnerable. They were unable to reach institutions. So we tried to started some campaigns where women, could get message from media or other social media channels that she can, ask her friends or her family members or her neighbors to help her. So we received these kind of complaints. So I would like to share some data of 6 months, the current data of 2021. So we are working in 23 districts of strength in collaboration with police, and now we are expanding our work to Karachi as well. We are establishing women and children protection cells in Karachi too. But right now, I'll share Hyderabad range 9 districts data with you. Within the 6 months, we have received 1,161 cases of violence against women, and specifically only from Hyderabad district, we received 50 cases in 6 months. So still, these are the cases. I would say that these are the heroes or the courageous women. They come out and spoke about whatever happened with them, but still there were a number of cases are unreported. I would like to mention here the recent case happened of Suratulan Baloch. She died while her husband was doing violence on her, and she was suffering from this situation since 10 years of her marriage. She had 4 kids. She never complained anywhere. I mean, she is living here in Hyderabad, in the same city where we are working, where we have received 1,161 cases within 6 months, but she never reported anywhere. So likewise, there are a number of women who are not enough courageous to come to the institution, and there are a number of reasons that why they are not coming, because of the lack of the trust on institution, because they have fear of losing their family honor, or they have fear that if they will complain against their husband or the family member who is doing violence on them, so might they will lose their shelter, or there would be no one who can financially support them. So these are the problems our society is facing, not establishing women as the centers can enough deal with this issue, but we conduct so many awareness sessions, or even our government to play their role. They can, include these rights of human women, or the pro women laws, or so many institutions the people must be knowing, or in college or university, our youth should be knowing that there are some options. They could be going there. What are their policies? What SOPs they are following? How they can approach to them. So this is what I would like to say.
So much for that very comprehensive overview, Marvi. It was also especially important to talk about the pandemic and how cases have risen, but at the same time, underreporting is such a big thing. So we still don't have proper data available, and it's very important to tackle that and make sure that women who are not coming forth because of the social issues you mentioned are given a platform to do so. So thank you very much. My next question, I'd like to go to Ms. Haver Mumtaz, who is the former chairperson of the National Commission of the Status of Women. Ma'am, I'd like to ask you, not only in response to what your fellow panelists have said about a concrete policy framework and the issue of social stigma and public reporting and underreporting as a result, but also how do you think we can increase capacity building, not only of government institutes and trainings, but in your experience, what kind of changes do you think are necessary for us to see a more positive outlook on this issue?
Thank you, Maruk. I think this is a very important discussion, especially in the light of the fact that we've just had two laws passed through or I should say, bulldozed through the parliament on rape, and the ordinances that recently were promulgated and now pushed through the National Assembly. I think when you're looking at the issues under a pandemic, which actually heightens the problems that women face, and just as Marvi has spoken about, the situation in Sindh, I agree with her, because those situations actually, the pandemic has actually highlighted the gaps within the system, that women are unable to get the kind of support they needed. So just earlier this year, in about 3 or 4 months ago, I did an exercise in all the provinces, a participatory discussion and consultation in every province, where we discussed the support services, violence against women support services, and women who are at the receiving end, the ones who are now isolated in homes or are reporting the fact that violence has increased. So what one found, and I think those are things that can be addressed also, because nobody actually thinks about these situations, and nobody actually talks to women who are likely to become victims or survivors. We need to hear from them what they want. And what one discovered very important was that there was a structural disconnect between those who provide shelters, for instance, the social welfare department, those who are responsible for preventing crime, that is the police, and those who are responsible for punishing the culprits, the courts. So there's a total disconnect between these three institutions, which are supposed to provide the protection and support to women. And the first thing that we need is to create those connections. The other thing that one found was that, you see, who do women turn to when there is violence, the domestic violence? They do turn to people, and those are their social networks. Now, the pandemic actually put a stall to the social networks also. So you didn't have a neighbor to turn to, you didn't have your counselor to turn to, you didn't have the CSOs who sometimes provide the support to go to. So I think it's very, very important that systems are in place, mechanisms are in place to establish this connectedness of women and girls with somebody who they can turn to. And that would have to be at the community level, the neighborhood level. Who is the person that a woman or a girl who's subjected to violence can reach out to? As Marvi very, very lucidly told us just now, that women didn't know who to reach out to. So how do you respond to it? There has to be people, and I think that's where the government has to step in, either through the local government or through one of the departments, the social welfare department, or a local organization, CSOs working to act as that hub for women to reach out to. And then the second thing is that that hub needs to know, excuse me, has to have just a minute. So, sorry, my phone was on. So the hub or whoever is the person to go to person should have the information of what are the available services in the vicinity or outside the vicinity. So that information has to be available, and then we need to have a monitoring system, which a provincial commission or a national commission on women or a child rights commission could provide that coordinating point between different sources of support. Now, this is not rocket science. These are administrative measures that can be put into place by local institutions and taken responsibility for. And then, of course, there are other things. There are multiple helplines in every province. There are a helpline for this and a helpline for that. We need to amalgamate them. Somehow amalgamate them so that they are interconnected. And then I think the example of the motorway incident comes to mind, where because the helplines were not connected with each other, they didn't reach out to the other possible source of support. So I think we need an amalgamation of the helplines where they can be linked to each other, and where they're also perhaps connected to a dashboard where we know what is happening. We don't have data enough, as again Marvi very ably pointed out. So I think these are the kind of things, and awareness of where women can go. Unless we put in these systems, we don't always need laws. We need systems of support, and we need monitoring of the institutions that are set up. There are multiple institutions. There are women protection centers, there are child protection bureaus, there are shelters, there are private shelters, there are government shelters. We just need to know where they are, and that information needs to be where women can reach out for that. And for this, I think it's very important that parliamentarians take up these issues, because we talk about laws, and the laws that we've just now had, there are so many holes in it. There is so much multiplicity, contradiction between each of them, that for anyone to reach out to them is going to be more complicated. We don't know which institution is doing what. So at least what is on the ground, if that can be connected, the social networks are supported. And finally, under situations like this pandemic or the lockdown, what we really need is that some of these services, shelters, health services, should be declared as essential services, which are run round the clock, regardless of the fact that there is a lockdown. You know, we do have essential services which work round the clock. These essential services, which are so important for women, should be declared as essential services. And again, I think we will ask the parliamentarians to take up these issues from the floor of the House and demand. And you see, it's not only the National Assembly. We now have to have, all this has to go down to the provincial assemblies. And the provincial assemblies and provincial commissions also have to have a role, and they do respond very promptly to cases and appeals for violence, but half the time nobody knows where to go for that. So you have those helplines which should be activated. Women don't have access to helplines also. Then they only have access to somebody who can hold their hand when they need it. So these are some of the suggestions that I have. I have a lot of criticism for the laws that have been hastily passed just now, but I don't think this is the forum we are discussing those at the moment.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mumtaz, for that very valuable insight and very valid points that were pointed out, particularly the importance of community outreach, and also, of course, making not only public aware, but also having governmental awareness of the essential role that must be played during lockdown restrictions. I'd like to move on now to Ms. Mariam Shabir. She is an environmentalist here at SDPI and recently has conducted her own study on climate migration and how it has disproportionately targeted women, and how that has contributed not only within the pandemic setting, but also beyond that in the violence against women area in Pakistan. Mariam, we'd love your insights. We'd also love to know what you have to add in terms of, we've talked about establishing a policy framework as well, but how do you think climate migration and the effect it has had on women should be incorporated to make a holistic approach to such a topic?
Thank you, Maru, for taking me on board. And I'm really pleased to speak on this subject with our eminent experts who are very much expert in their own fields. I have to speak with in relation with harassment and climate change. There are a few research studies which talk about this, but when it comes to Pakistan, there are very less studies. And I remember your question brought my memory back to 2016 year in which I wrote article on harassment, floods, water, and harassment. And we have seen that I was consulting different research studies, secondary data sources actually, to see that what was the number. And there was only one research study by some organization at that time, which only had one table in the annex, which had some numbers, and out of that I have to calculate and predict that how many harassment cases were there. And during 2010 floods in areas of Punjab, sexual harassment was 19 times more frequent than under normal circumstances. So recently I conducted research on climate-induced migrations with gender angle. And when I spoke to those communities, they in Tharparkar, of course, and in Muzaffargarh, where heat wave and floods are more frequent in these areas, and droughts in Tharparkar as well. And at that, when I was speaking to the women over there, they told that, especially in areas of Punjab, they have to, during floods, they do not have safe places to take shelter, and they have to go to shrines, mosques, schools, or whatever, in emergency situation, whatever shelter they find, and temporary camps as well, wherever there is availability. They go there, but there were some of the community members who said that they were not comfortable for taking their daughters to those camps set up by the government or by some volunteers, because there were cases of abduction of not only girls, but also kids during floods. And they were very afraid. There was this 42 years old woman who told us she was very afraid to take her girls during 2010 and 2011 floods because there were some rape cases over there, and she didn't want that. I mean, she was risking her life and her daughter's life just to save them from harassment and sexual abuse. So even during you see in especially rural areas, I was listening to one of the panelists who was talking about rural women. In rural areas, women do not have access to drinking water. Leave the debate about clean drinking water. They do not have access to that at all. So to fetch water, they have to travel long distances, and they have to compromise on their kids as well. They have to leave them behind. They also help men in their fields, and they also have to collect water. So for fetching water, they have to travel hours to longer distances. And during those times, they also face issues of harassment. And that is, I think, whenever we talk about some bill which is related to, harassment or violence or any such things. And of course, talking about violence, during these climate-induced disasters, whether it's drought, it's heat wave, it's flood, women, the multiplication is more during such disasters. And if we talk about a pandemic like COVID-19, we are seeing different reports. And just yesterday, I was reading on Twitter the hashtag justice for Kuratulen, whose husband, beaten him up. She was mother of 4 kids, and she was beaten to death. So, during climate-induced disasters, these events also multiply harassment and violence, and rape cases, their number increases, and honor of the females are compromised. When I was going through different climate change policies, this angle of harassment was missing in those policies as well. And I haven't read this recent bill, but I have, seen and heard different comments from different people whenever I turn on my social media. So, whenever there are some different bills, this climate-induced harassment or climate-induced rape cases or climate-induced violence, this debate is generally missing, that link is missing. And I think whenever we are devising or revising climate change policies, whether at provincial level or at federal level, because after 18th Amendment, environment is a provincial subject. So whenever we are talking about that, we also need to consider these these climatic events, because these are more frequent in particularly in Pakistan and South Asia, because we are the most vulnerable nation when it comes to climate change. We are in top 10 vulnerable countries. So we have to keep these instances in mind as well, that how women suffer in those, and because women are the front line, at the front line whenever there is such incident of flood, heat wave, or any climate-induced disaster.
Thank you so much, Mariam, for outlining why a holistic approach to violence against women policies is necessary. We've seen with the outbreak of COVID-19 how even that was a gendered issue. And as we're dealing with more and more climate change issues, it's important to remember that that too is a gendered issue, and therefore these policies must be integrated at every level to ensure protection for women. With that, I'd like to kind of open the floor a little bit to all of our panelists. For my next question, you can raise your hand if you want to answer, or just start speaking if no one else is. But I wanted to ask, there was a common theme that I've noticed from all of you is that seems to be not only a great disconnect between departments of governments, but there's also been a lack of political will generated to make sure that these things do happen. How do you think at like the societal level, what the obstacles are to create more awareness on this issue, make it not only increase public awareness, but also raise awareness on how important this issue is and how gendered policies are so important? So how do you think obstacles such as this can be overcome to lead to better, not only legal protections, but also implementations? Perhaps if Nighat Dad would like to speak about, in particular, how maybe the social media and digital space could be utilized for such things?
Yeah, so Maruk, I feel that, like it's a responsibility of media also as a, like watchdog to cover, for instance, incidents like domestic violence or other incidents or crimes against any gender, right? With more responsibility, because the way we are seeing now, especially in social media, there is absolutely no respect for privacy when it comes to victims and survivors. And every single time, a woman activist or feminist, they reach out to these media organizations and tell them, can you please hide the identity of the victim and survivor? We have recently seen with this Usman Mirza case, right? And I think it's very important for people to understand that, and of course, they have a good intention to raise awareness about certain issue, but how they can do it with responsibility, right? So all our conscious is, to spread awareness, to spread the word out, and, to let people know this is what is happening, and we have to deal with this issue. But sharing, those graphic images and videos, it's not just that you are showing the brutal picture to the society, but you are also forwarding the same violence, right? And really, this is the time that we need to think about the consent of the victim and survivor, right? That how much say and voice they have when we forward such content on our WhatsApp groups, on our social media accounts. So I think it's spreading awareness and raising awareness is one thing, but how to do it, carefully and cautiously as a good digital citizen is one thing that we really need to do. हमारे ड्रामे इस वक्त अदा कर रहे हैं, वो all of us together, institutions, CSOs, government, sabak leti, like every single drama we are showing to our society. We have dearth of, the what do you call it, like वायलेंस आपकी पैट्रियार्की से, मिसोजिनी से, सेक्सिज्म से हो रहा है ना. सो अगर आपके ड्रामे और आपका जो कंटेंट है ऑन योर मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया सटल तरीके से वो सब दिखा रहा है, then what are the what you are showing this to your like younger generation और अपनी larger society को. So I think these are the two things that I wanted to say कि larger context में awareness इस तरीके से different stakeholders जो है वो raise कर सकता है.
Thank you so much for that. Very No, thank you so much for that very helpful intervention. I do think it's very important to recognize individual responsibility when reporting and trying to raise awareness to do it in such a way to protect the survivor. I also think it was a very good point to mention schooling and syllabuses in schools, because this has to start with the younger generation if there is to be long-term change brought about. So thank you so much for highlighting that. I can see in our Q&A box a question directed to Ms. Avan that has been answered, but in case there are other people out there who similarly have questions on concealing identity when reporting and filing FIRs, if Marvi could take out a second to explain exactly how reporting goes down according to her professional expertise, that might be useful to our audience in general. Marvi, yeah, go ahead. You're just muted. Thanks.
Marvi is muted.
You there?
Yeah, Marvi, we can't hear you. Maybe if you turn your camera off, your connection will be better.
Marvi, turn off her camera if there is an issue with her internet.
Okay, can you listen to me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
So Maru, can you listen to me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Please repeat your question.
Oh,
Because
sorry.
of
It's just
the internet issue, I couldn't properly.
no worries. It's there in the chat box as well. Someone asked that in order to conceal the identity of the victim, is it not impossible to file an FIR, because how would that be filed? Nigat has responded and said there's an anonymous option, but I thought maybe for the betterment of outlining how such cases can be reported with your level of experience, you could highlight how it's possible to do so while respecting the victims, while safeguarding the victim's identity. Sorry, can you hear me?
I think there is a connection issue at Marvi's, and maybe Howard can respond to this because she has dealt with this.
Can you just repeat the question, because somehow the chat box is not showing fully in my.
Oh, no worries. It's the Q&A section. I'll just tell you. So the question was that in order to conceal the victim's identity, he thinks Ms. Avan said that they don't file an FIR, and so if they're not filing FIRs, how do they proceed with any legal action against the perpetrator?
No, I think when you are filing what Marvi was talking about was making the identity public.
Mm-hmm.
You see, because the law also requires for the identity to remain, not to expose the identity of a survivor. So I think what she was referring to is the protection of the identity of the survivor or the victim. And of course, an FIR will not be filed without somebody coming forward, or the name. There have to be specifics in the FIR. But I think what we all agree on, and I think the law also provides, the 2016 anti-rape law, for instance, or the domestic, it provides for protection of the victim or the survivor for her own protection, because she doesn't want to be, we don't want her to be I mean, it's her privacy, it's her dignity also. When you make somebody who's been a victim, a public identity, it also puts her in a difficult spot, given the nature of our society, where a victim is often blamed for what has happened to her. So I think that is what was being talked about. There was another point that was raised about whether females commit violence on females. And the point is, yes, they do, because the violence is always committed by those who are powerful against those who are weak. And in a society where women are generally weaker than men, are the ones who are on the receiving end. And it's the kind of violence that is, the violence is reinforced by not punishing the perpetrator, it validates itself. So women also can use the same mechanisms of violence, because that becomes the norm. But it is really an issue of powerful and the weak. And therefore, we have to make sure and focus on the weak, not remaining weak and having a voice of support or a voice to retaliate. You see, men also are violent against men. I mean, it's not that men don't commit violence against the men. So it's not a question of who is committing against whom, but women becoming more of in terms of numbers, more vulnerable to violence.
Absolutely. I think it's very important to realize whoever the weaker party is. Yes, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Okay, fine. So thanks to Karan and for explaining it well. In 2016, we have received 10,000 above cases from 23 districts of SIND and few cases from other provinces as well. So we are trying to connecting them from the local police of that area. So we are not only talking about dealing with the complaint. The nature of complaint could be of cyber crime, or it could be a needed a police action, or the nature of case is of court. Because if the woman is coming and asking that I wanted to get separate from my husband, police there was a so we have to sue them. The problem here is our police or the complaint officers, they are not sensitized. They are even not well aware of the laws of the institution as well. Here we were talking about this issue is issue as well. There was some case of Anila Parmar. She went to police for has in some cyber issue. Police said that this is not my problem. Please go to FIA, and her FIA, and finally she committed suicide. And someone was blackmailing her. So these kind of, ignorance, or any woman is coming to you and the officer complaining that officer or a responsible officer is not able to respond according to the issue the woman suffering from. This is really very important that, we have to provide services according to the specific issue. If वो कहती है कि मेरी आँख में दर्द है और हम उसको कान की दवा दे दें तो ये उसका solution नहीं होगा. So this is how what we women protection cells are doing. We are working as a bridge between the police department or the public or the lack of, and we are trying to fix the lack of trust issue as well, or we are providing counseling also, because there is a huge number women don't want to lodge complaint as a FIR, or she don't want to take huge step against her own husband or a family member or a brother or a father. So if something is happening, like if any abusive situation happened at their house, or if they hit each other in a light manner, or if they are harming to us, or complaining that, or the person is not, providing basic needs to the lady or children. So these kind of complaints can, if we are trying for the rehabilitation, point of view, or we are talking to the both parties that what happened, this should not be happened, or there are more, strategy to counsel a family or counsel individual when they are coming up with their issues. If the institution, the case become worse, the extreme nature of violence happened after the sequence of incidents happened, on initial stage. If woman is not stopping a person that don't hit me, or I have somebody or respect, I am not here to listen your abuse all the time. If woman is stopping the abuse, so this is converting into worse nature. So we have to give courage to our women as well to respond whenever this is happening first with her, or she must be knowing that where she would be going for. System should be ready that to deal with the nature of complaint. According to the nature of complaint, the service providers should be responding a lady. Here in Women Protection Cell, we tried to, provide so many facilities. Here is, the helpline number as well in our directory. If a woman is coming with the nature which this neglect or her organization is dealing or giving the information about that institution. If the lady is coming for shelter, we have a Darul Aman or other shelter home contact number. To that, are not safe house. Any woman is coming to sell or in no safe house. Okay. So can you hear me, Mari?
Yes, we can hear you. I think with your camera off, your internet connection might be slightly better.
Okay, fine. Okay. Woman is coming and seeking for a shelter, and if the court time is over, we cannot refer that lady to a specific, that 24 hours. Any woman can get angry after order from the issues I have to address, these kind of things as well. So when it might differ from cases, in an example of Dadu case, where the something happened, the rape happened of a lady, or what happened, the doctors were guilty of not providing a correct report, or whatever specifically happened with her. So there are a number of flaws within the department. Or here, even today, I had meetings with FIA officials in Hyderabad. That was a very extensive meeting. We discussed so many issues like that. Even I would like to share that we human rights activists, women rights activists are under threat as well. On social media, people are trying to defame us. People are trying to, do hate, personal attack, or force people who are trusting on us or on our initiative. They would be discouraged and they would not come so
Thank you so much for that, Marvi. I think it's really important that you highlighted the importance of creating safe spaces for women to come forward, not only, of course, primarily the victims and survivors, but also other activists as well. I see that Nighat has her hand up. If there's anything you'd like to say to conclude the webinar, we're welcome.
Yeah, I think my last point is that we have been talking about reforms and the things that we can do as, you know, different stakeholders and actors to address this issue. एक जो बहुत important चीज़ है वो ये है that honestly, like government and people who are in power in provinces या federal side पे, they really need to put that ego aside और जो initiatives या laws already आए हुए हैं उनको बेहतर बनाने की कोशिश करें और उनको implement करने की कोशिश करें. For instance, Punjab Protection Act was enacted in 2016, right? And it's only notified in Multan district क्योंकि वहीं पे war center है. So that's the main feature of this law. So what we have done in last 4 years, उस law को बेहतर बनाने के लिए कि एक जो पंजाब का कानून है वो पूरे पंजाब में तो नाफिज हो जाए, बट कोई उस हवाले से हमें एफर्ट्स नजर नहीं आती हैं, कोई कन्वर्सेशन नहीं हो रही है व्हाट दिस प्रोविंशियल गवर्नमेंट इज डूइंग टू डील विद दिस सर्टन. सो क्या सिर्फ मुल्तान में वो केसेस रिपोर्ट होंगे? सो व्हाट अबाउट द डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस केसेस दैट इज द केसेस दैट आर हैपनिंग अक्रॉस द प्रोविंस बिसाइड्स मुल्तान डिस्ट्रिक्ट? सो एक तो वो चीज है, एंड द सेकंड थिंग इज दैट द वन दैट इज बीइंग क्रिटिसाइज्ड दैट इज द आईसीटी लॉ, वो इस्लामाबाद का डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस का कानून है, वो पूरे मराहिल से गुजर के आया है. इट्स अ गुड लॉ, उसमें ऑलरेडी जो चीजें मौजूद हैं वो आपके पीपीसी में मौजूद हैं. सो द यू नो बहुत सी चीजें ऑलरेडी, तो आई डोंट नो क्रिटिसिज्म किस चीज पे आता है कि एकदम से एक लहर शुरू हो जाती है क्रिटिसाइज करने की. प्रोविंसेस में ये कवानीन ऑलरेडी मौजूद हैं, उनको मजीद अच्छे तरीके से इम्प्लीमेंटेशन की जरूरत है. जो खबर मुमताज साहिबा ने बातें कही हैं, एग्जैक्टली हमें वो चीजें करने की जरूरत है. और जब कोई एड्रेस और अगर इस्लामाबाद में कानून लाने की कोशिश की जा रही है विच ह्यूमन राइट्स मिनिस्ट्री इज डूइंग इट, तो उस पे वो वाला क्रिटिसिज्म जो 1 तिहाई पहले हम लोग सुनते थे, तो प्लीज खुदा का नाम लें और इस तरह के फजूल किस्म के क्रिटिसिज्म्स जिनकी कोई बुनियाद नहीं है, जिनकी कोई मजहबी बुनियाद नहीं है, उसको इस्तेमाल करके ऐसे कवानीन को मत रोकें. लेकिन जो कवानीन मौजूद है उनको बेहतर बनाने की कोशिश करें, बजाय ये कि ऑर्डिनेंसेस की सूरत में यू नो वही चीजें आप बार बार ले आए, इंस्टेड ऑफ यू नो लाइक जो ऑलरेडी मौजूद है उनको नाफिज करने की कोशिश करें. बस यही कहना था मुझे.
Thank you so much, Nighat. It was very useful to hear that. I do agree that instead of focusing on new laws, the laws that are existing should be properly implemented and expanded if need be. All very good points made. To wrap up, finally, I'd like to just ask Ms. Khabar Mumtaz a concluding question, really, just based on her expertise. How you would think generating political will and exactly the things Nighat was just talking about, how you think the way forward should be for us. Go.
Actually, political will comes from political leadership. And unfortunately, we're not seeing the kind of seriousness towards this issue that we think is required, in the sense that to pass a law in a hurry which duplicates what already is there does not create a political will. Political will be evident when we see systems that are being promised in a law are actually in place and are functioning and are not creating more confusion or contradictions. You know, you can't have the Prime Minister getting involved in addressing violence. I mean, it has to be done by the agencies that are created, already established for that task. So we need to have good monitoring systems, and we need to have, I mean, unfortunately, I find the will for justice has to come from those who are implementing it. And for that, I think a lot of not only sensitization, I think a lot of vigilance in making sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Are we providing the kind of support that is required? For instance, the medical legal officers, we find that there are not enough female medical legal officers to examine women and girls. We don't have a space for them to examine them within hospitals. So the lack of, this is where we see the lack of intent serious intent. So the mechanisms that are provided for in the existing laws even, those mechanisms have to be in place. They have to be resourced, human resource as well as material resource. We talk about forensics, but we don't have enough forensic laboratories. One laboratory in a whole province is not going to fulfill your need, given where we all recognize and the government recognizes the increase in abuse and violence against women. And in spite of the laws, we don't see things happening because that's where the litmus test for the political will is seen. And I think our parliamentarians have to take responsibility for their constituencies to make sure these systems are working in their constituencies. They've done one good job by making a law, but law is not often followed by rules. And rules are the ones that set up mechanisms. And once the mechanisms are made, then you need resources, human and financial, and intent. I find that in Sindh, we see much more engagement of the police department. They've even created sanctioned positions for MLOs, the medical legal officers. So far, it used to be the doctor in the hospital who was assigned that additional duty. So I think we need to really rethink our systems and mechanisms. And that's where and for that, civil society pressure is also very important. Pressure from doctors, pressures from legal community, the parliamentarians and civil society itself. We've discovered as rights activists that unless you raise your voice again and again, you don't get enough response. So it's a multiple pronged approach that we need.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was very valuable and very helpful. Finally, to wrap up, Mariam, I see your hands up. Could you quickly give us just your concluding thoughts? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Maruf. Just to build on Madam Khawar Sahiba talking about the role of relevant institutions, I think it's very important to hire where seats are vacant. After Madam Khawar Sahiba has left NCSW, I think it's been 3 years that government has not appointed any relevant person. So that also, suffers speed of work. So I think relevant institutions' role is really, really important.
Absolutely, I would agree on that, certainly. And I'm sorry, Mariam, I have not spoken about your environmental findings. Maybe we can talk about it as another point, because I think that's a very important area that we need to examine. Climate change is coming and women are not factored into any policy or action.
Thank you, Madam. Looking forward to.
Thank you all so much for such a rich and engaging discussion. Thank you for all of our panelists for your views. It's been very, very helpful, and I'm sure we'll have some great feedback on our policy recommendations going forward. Thank you all so much for coming, and I wish you a happy Eid ahead.
Thank you, and
Thank you.
best wishes to you also and to all the panelists.
Maruf, and you shall also thank Mariam for bringing some gender balance to the panel.
Yes, Mariam, thank you so much for bringing a male figure into this panel. They're not around enough in Pakistan.